Hi, I am Liz for any of you watching that are not in one of my sections. And I had some questions about phonology that I thought I could clear up by putting together a little mini lecture going over a pretty comprehensive phonology problem that I think is going to cover almost all of the stuff that we have done in phonology in class and clear up any points of confusion that you may have. So let's get started. So we're going to be doing a problem about Greek, and you may have seen this problem already in your section, but I have modified the data set a little bit, so it still might be worth following through with this. And there is a handout to go with this mini lecture, which you should have seen in the announcement on Canvas if you want to use this to follow along with what we're doing. So we're going to be examining the four sounds that are shown here: the voiceless velar stop, the voiceless velar fricative, this voiceless palatal stop represented with the C, and the voiceless palatal fricative, which is the C with the little curly thing underneath it. And our data set is here on the left. So we're going to do four sets of comparison. We could maybe do more, but these are the four that we're going to do. So we'll be comparing the two velar sounds, the two palatal sounds, the two stops, and the two fricatives, and see what we can find. So remember that these steps of phonological rule analysis are as follows. So first you look for minimal pairs. If you can find any minimal pairs concerning any of the sets that we're looking at, then you're done with that set. And you have figured out that those two are contrastive sounds that belong to different phonemes. If you can't, then you move on to the next step, which is listing all of the environments that the sounds appear in. And then you observe those environments. You ask, do they overlap with each other? If they do, then those are contrastive sounds and you stop with that set. If they don't, then they are in complementary distribution and you move on to the final steps. So step 4 is looking for any patterns you can find in the chart. And then step 5 is determining which allophone is the basic one, which appears in the widest range of environments, and which one is the restricted one, which appears in a particular kind of environment. And then once you figure that out, you are able to write your rules. So step 1, we're going to look for any minimal pairs that we can find involving these four sounds. So first, we can see this kano is a minimal pair with this kano. I might not be saying any of these words correctly, but we can see that those are minimal pair because all the sounds are the same except the first sound. And then I don't see any words that are minimal pair with this one or this one. This one's close, but notice that there are two differences. The first sound is different, and then there is like an L in the first one and a trill in the second one. So that's not quite a minimal pair. And then we have another minimal pair here. So for the words that mean daughter and dances. And then we have another one with the words that mean money and shame. And then this doesn't match anything else as a minimal pair, and this doesn't, and this does not. So these are the only three minimal pairs that we can find. So what have we learned from this? Well, we have learned that the voiceless velar stop and the voiceless velar fricative are contrastive because we were able to find minimal pairs to prove that they belong to different phonemes. So we are done with that set. We can move on to the next steps of analysis. So because we weren't able to find any minimal pairs with any of the other sets, we have to start listing environments. We could do this one set at a time, but we're just going to list all the environments all at once, and then we will look at the appropriate parts of the table to do our analysis. So you look at each word, and anywhere in the word where any of these sounds show up, you have to mark it on your table. So for the word that means do, we see that that symbol is at the beginning, followed by an ah. And then for the word that means lose, we have at the beginning of the word, also followed by ah. And then for the word that means pour, beginning of the word followed by the E vowel represented with the lowercase I. And then for the word that means eel, it's also the beginning of the word followed by the letter E, but the vowel is more like an eh sound. And then for the one that means candle, same thing, but put it in the correct spot of the table because this is the one without the little curl at the bottom of it. And then we have the K again, the beginning of the word followed by O, and then X, beginning of the word followed by O, and then X again. This one is at the beginning of the word followed by an R. And then this K is at the beginning of the word followed by R. And then we're now down to the word that means handful. So we have another X, beginning of the word followed by U. And then for the word that means bonbons, beginning of the word followed by U. And then for the word that means China, we have beginning of the word followed by the E sound. So we've completed listing all the environments. And now we're pretty much going to do steps 3 through 6 for each set one at a time. First, we're going to compare the two palatal sounds represented by the C and the C with the little curl at the bottom of it. So we're going to ask ourselves all of these questions. So first, do the environments overlap? Well, yes, they do. In fact, they show up in completely identical environments. In both cases, we find it at the beginning of a word followed by this E sound, and then at the beginning of the word followed by this eh kind of sound. So in our list of steps earlier, we said that if we can find them in overlapping environments, then that means they are in contrastive distribution. They belong to different phonemes. And we don't have to do steps 4 through 6 now, because we're not dealing with allophones of the same phoneme where there would be a rule. They just belong to different phonemes, and we can move on to the next set. So we've completed the first 2 sets. We found that the first one was contrasted due to our minimal pairs. The second one, we couldn't find any minimal pairs, but we show that they have overlapping environments, thus showing us that they are in different phonemes. So now you might be wondering though, why are they contrastive just because they have overlapping environments? And I think this is one of the biggest points of confusion. So when we have minimal pairs, we are also dealing with overlapping environments technically. So we have this minimal pair here for the words kano and lejano. So both the K symbol and the X symbol, they appear in the environment where they are at the beginning of the word followed by an A. And because it's a minimal pair, we are positive that the only thing allowing these words to be distinguished is the difference between the k and the ch. Like changing just that letter is changing the whole meaning of the word. So we know that those different sounds can be used to change the meaning of a word, and they belong to different phonemes. But when we don't have minimal pairs, the only thing we can do is check for overlapping environments and use that as proof. So we have these 2 words that are really close to being a minimal pair, but they're not quite a minimal pair because the last letter is also different. So in this case, the 2 sounds we're interested in both appear at the beginning of the word followed by E. So it's pretty likely that they belong to different phonemes because of this. And you might still not be convinced. So think about predictability. We have said that if 2 sounds are allophones of the same phoneme, then their distribution should be predictable. If these 2 sounds belong to the same phoneme, how would we write like a predictable rule to describe this distribution? We would not be able to, because they appear in the same environment. It's random and unpredictable. So that's another argument as to why they belong to different phonemes, because you cannot write a rule saying in the condition of this one appears and in the other condition, this one appears. They're showing up in the exact same conditions. So that is really strong evidence telling us that these are allophones of different phonemes, even though we don't have the minimal pair evidence. Now we're going to do the third set of sounds, which will be looking at the 2 stops. So the velar stop, the voiceless velar stop, and the voiceless palatal stop. So looking at our table, we can ask, do the environments overlap? That is there any environment in this first set that matches identically any environment in the second set? And no, they do not. They do not have any that match fully. So no, they are in complementary distribution. So then we can look for patterns. We can see in both cases, they can appear at the beginning of a word. So that is a pattern, but it isn't really telling us much because it happens for both of them. So what about what comes after the sound? So for the K, I'm not really seeing anything obvious. For the palatal stop, I am seeing that they're both vowels, but we have vowels up here too. So can we try describing those 2 vowels with a natural class? Because it can't just be vowels, because that applies to the other sound too. So we have to make it a little more restricted than that. So for this vowel that is represented with the letter E, that's kind of like an eh sound, we have a mid vowel that is front advanced bitwise. It's unrounded and it is tense. And then for the other sound, which is represented by the lowercase I, but pronounced E, we have a high vowel that is also front, also unrounded, and also tense. So we can describe these vowels by saying that they're front unrounded tense vowels. So now we can finish the analysis. So we looked for patterns and we found that the palatal stop only appears before front unrounded tense vowels. And then K kind of appears elsewhere, other places besides that. So then we have to ask ourselves, which is the basic allophone, which is the one that appears in the widest range of environments. And in this case, that's going to be the voiceless velar stop because it appears elsewhere. So is the basic allophone, and the palatal one is the restricted allophone. So now we can write the rule that conditions this distribution. So the first part of the phonological rule is the phonemic representation. And we're going to put the K there because that's the basic one. And the basic one is the one that goes between the slashes. Becomes the C in the environment of before front unrounded tense vowels. And that's our rule. So now we have completed the third set. We found that these two sounds are in complementary distribution, so they are allophones belonging to the same phoneme, and that the voiceless palatal stop only appears before front unrounded tense vowels, and the voiceless velar stop appears elsewhere. So now we have one more set to do, which is the two fricatives, basically. So do the environments overlap? Well, we pretty much have the exact same thing that we did last time, so we could say no. They are in complementary distribution. And then looking for patterns, we have the same pattern that we did last time. The voiceless palatal fricative appears before front unrounded tense vowels, and the X one appears elsewhere. So which is the basic allophone? Well, X is the basic allophone because it appears in the widest range of environments, and the voiceless palatal fricative is the restricted allophone. So once more, we can write our rule, and it looks a lot like the last one. So the basic one, which is the X symbol, is the phoneme, and that's going to go between the slashes. And that turns into the voiceless palatal fricative in the environment of before front unrounded tense vowels. So we've completed all four sets of the analysis, and we found that the last one also has complementary distribution because we found that the voiceless palatal fricative only appears before front unrounded tense vowels, and the voiceless velar fricative appears elsewhere. So there's one last part to this, and it's asking if we can condense these rules using natural classes. Can we have one rule instead of just two? Because after all, these rules look pretty similar. So first, look at the left side of the rule and see if we can come up with a natural class for the two sounds represented by the K and the X. So voicing wise, they're both voiceless. Place wise, they're both velars, but manner, no match. We have a stop and a fricative. Okay, so we can at least say that they're both voiceless velars. And then what about the right side of the rule? So we have these two symbols represented by the C and the C with the little curl at the bottom of it. So voicing wise, they're both voiceless. Place, they're both palatal, but manner, no match. We have a stop and a fricative. But we can at least say that they're both voiceless palatals. So given this, we can reformulate the rule and say that voiceless velars become voiceless palatals before the front unrounded tense vowels. And one thing I want to note about this is that it kind of makes sense, basically. So if you look at the full IPA consonant chart, you know that the places of articulation are indicated along the columns, starting at the front and going to the back. And velars are a little further back than palatals. And so basically what is happening in this rule is that things that are velar are moving just a little bit forward when they are followed by a vowel that is in the front of your mouth. So that's kind of what happens, and it makes sense. So that's a little sanity check you could sometimes do with the rule, is just kind of look at what it's telling you and like think about how that would behave in your mouth and ask, like, does this make sense that this kind of change would happen? And in this case, it does make sense. So as a summary, we compared four sets of sounds. So for the first one, we were able to find minimal pairs to say that the two velar sounds are in contrastive distribution and belong to different phonemes. Then for the two palatal sounds, we didn't find any minimal pairs, but we proved they were in contrastive distribution and belong to different phonemes because we found overlapping environments in our T charts. And then for the two stops, we didn't find any overlapping environments and determined that they're in complementary distribution, and the palatal one only appears before the more front vowels. And for the last set, the two fricatives, again, no overlapping environments, but they're in complementary distribution. And we showed that the palatal one appears before the more front vowels. And then the last thing we did is condense our two rules into one rule to show the general phonological phenomenon that is occurring. So this probably turned out to be a little more than a mini lecture, but I hope that if you were having some trouble with phonology, this at least helped you reiterate the concepts another time to get you more familiar with them. And if you have any questions about this little lecture or the handout or whatever, you can comment on this video or on the announcement that I made in Canvas, and I will try to get back to you. But otherwise, good luck and happy studying.